And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi, I'm meteorologist Peter Chan with your marine weather forecast as we look at things on this Sunday, July 16th, 2023. To start, we continue to have an area of low pressure sitting just east of Kodiak City here in the western Gulf. This is the system responsible for just the soggy weather across much of southwest, south central Alaska this weekend. Rainfall amounts have been as high as 2-3 inches, even locally higher in some of the mountainous terrain. This system, though, will gradually weaken and slide a bit southeastward into the lower central Gulf as we go into Monday. The Panhandle has seen an area of a marine layer from around Yakutat Bay down to Sitka this Sunday morning and afternoon. And overall, conditions across areas of the Alcan border, we do anticipate drier air, warmer temperatures, and some scattered thunderstorms Monday into Tuesday. Here comes the next frontal system through the western Aleutians. This will have some low-end gale force winds associated with it, but it also is a push of warmer air that's going to work its way across the Aleutians and the lower portion of the Bering Sea as we go through early this week. By the time we get into Monday afternoon, here is that low continuing to slide a little southeastward and weakening, some drying down across the west side of the state, and here comes that frontal system with breezier conditions across the western into the central Aleutians. And then for Tuesday afternoon, we have a weak low pressure continuing to gradually fill through the lower Gulf and North Pacific interface. A trough back up here across east central areas, warming temperatures and some scattered showers and thunderstorms, especially with the daytime heating. Frontal system crossing the Bering will weaken and become more of a trough as it does bring some rain showers into areas of the west coast by midweek. And looking at ice across the far north, kind of the seasonal trend of just the slow melting that's occurring along the Beaufort Sea coastline. Open water generally reported here across the Chukchi Sea, especially as you get down through the Bering Strait. No notable winds this time of year. The weather systems are just weaker than what you would see in the fall, winter, or spring, so we don't anticipate much in the way of ice movement the next few days. Across the Panhandle, south winds 15 knots. Inner channels will produce waves 2-3 feet. Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage down to Dixon Entrance. Look for south to southeast winds 15 knots. Sitka southward, turning easterly once you get near and north of Gustavus through outside of Yakutat Bay. And for Tuesday, southeast winds 15 to as high as 20 knots down toward Ketchikan and Metlakatla. We're looking at waves 3 feet, maybe as high as 4 feet, Dixon Entrance. And then as we get down here, south of Sitka, east to southeast winds 20 knots, and then generally easterly winds 15 knots, Sitka northward up through south of Yakutat Bay with waves running 4 to 5 feet for the nearshore waters within 15 nautical miles there of the Panhandle coastline. Across the Kenai Peninsula, the outer coast, look for winds northeast 15 knots. Variable winds 10 knots at the entrance of Cook Inlet, but look for east-northeast winds, Prince William Sound and Upper Cook Inlet at 15 knots with waves running a few feet there. And on Tuesday, variable winds within Prince William Sound at 10 knots, waves a couple of feet. Same thing, Upper Cook Inlet. And even as we go down the length of Cook Inlet, we anticipate variable winds around 10 knots with waves running a couple of feet. Across the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, look for winds west-northwest 15 to 20 knots. Waves 2 to 3 feet on the North Pacific side and surrounding Kodiak Island, and 3 to 4 feet on the Bering side. And for Tuesday, variable winds within Shelikof Strait, 10 knots, waves just a couple of feet. Still northwest winds 15 to 20 knots on the North Pacific side of the peninsula, with waves 2 to 3 feet, and then variable winds around 10 knots, especially north of Cold Bay, with waves running 3 to 5 feet, and 15-knot westerly winds with 3 to 4 foot waves in the open waters there of Bristol Bay. Across the Aleutians, generally west-southwest winds around 15 knots. Eastern central Aleutians, they will pick up west of Adak, 25 to 35 knot gales from the south, west of Kiska, where waves will exceed 10 to near 14 feet. And then on Tuesday, that frontal system, strong southerly flow, 25 to 30 knots west of Adak, will kick up waves 9 to 12 feet out there. But the eastern and central Aleutians still looking for winds to have some sort of westerly component. Northwest winds 15 knots, eastern Aleutians turning southwesterly in the vicinity of the central Aleutians around 15 knots. Waves generally 2 to 3 feet in the central eastern Aleutians on the Bering side and as much as 5 feet there south of Atka. Along the southwest coast, 15-knot northwesterly winds in Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. Variable winds 10 knots around St. Paul and St. George. Look for west-northwest winds 10 to 15 knots, Norton Sound down into just off of the Yukon Delta. Waves 2 to 3 feet there. And on Tuesday, winds will be southwesterly, 10 knots there along the Yukon Delta on up into Norton Sound with 2-foot waves. Turning westerly, and then 25-knot winds reaching St. Matthew with waves building to 9 feet. West-northwest winds 15 knots in Kuskokwim, Bristol Bays with waves generally running just a couple of feet. And then finally getting up through areas of the far northern Bering. South-southwest winds 15 to 20 knots north side of St. Lawrence Island up through the Bering Strait. Kind of a mix winds here through the lower portion of the Chukchi Sea at 10 to 15 knots with waves at 2 to 3 feet. In the far north, look for east-northeast winds 15 to 20 knots with waves 3 to 4 feet where there is any open water. And then on Tuesday, winds across the Arctic there, variable 5 to 10 knots, but turning southerly, increasing to 25 knots across the lower Chukchi Sea with waves of 4 to 6 feet, and south winds through the Bering Strait and north side of St. Lawrence Island at 20 knots and waves running generally around 4 feet.